Hello, and welcome to this module on social engineering. Let's see what the slide covers. We'll start with what is social engineering, and follow that with what are the goals of social engineering. Then we'll move on to what skills are required and what social engineering techniques are out there, and follow that with why is social engineering so effective. And finally, we'll close off with what are the countermeasures. So what is social engineering? Well, let's look at the definition. So social engineering is the use of deception to manipulate individuals into divulging confidential or personal information that may be used for fraudulent purposes. So in other words, it is trying to trick human beings into giving us information that we will need to use to break into targets or exploit vulnerabilities down the line. So the best way to think of it is as hacking into human nature. So in this module we'll be talking about how to hack into humans, and there are some technical techniques, but most of it is social. And hence the term social engineering. It's interacting with human beings through communication mechanisms to try and trick them into giving you information that they would not normally give. So what are the goals of social engineering? Well, let's look at them very, very quickly. There are three primary goals in social engineering, and they are to get confidential information, to get authentication credentials, or to gain some form of access control. So the main aim of social engineering is to get confidentiality, to get the confidential information and get information that we need down the line. So think of it as an extension of enumeration, where you're getting more information, but it also has a small aspect of gaining access because you are getting authentication credentials, or in some instances physical access control. Okay, let's move on to what skills are required. So what skills are required? Well, to be a good social engineer, you need to be an interpersonal skills person. In other words, you have to be a very, very good talker. You must be able to convince your target that you are what you are not really are, so that you can get them to give you usernames and passwords, to get them to give you confidential information, to get them to give you access to systems you shouldn't normally have access to. You also have to be slightly extroverted, or you have to pretend to be an extrovert. You have to be able to communicate effectively with people, because this is, for all intents and purposes, the art of deception. So social engineering is a little bit of science, but mostly an art. So think of it as the art of deception, and there's a very good book out there called The Art of Deception that was written some years ago by Kevin Mitnick, which actually talks about real case studies of social engineering. Finally, you have to be able to think creatively. When you're setting up your social engineering attacks, you will need to think up very clever ways to craft emails or chat messages or phone calls or whatever it is you're going to use to trick the target into giving you the information that you need, or click on a link that they shouldn't be clicking on. So you need to be able to think a little bit outside the box. And then finally, you have to be a master of all forms of communication, because all social engineering involves communication to the end users of an organization, who are your primary targets, and it will cover things like email, chat, phone calls, even in-person conversations, because that is where the, in inverted commas, hack takes place. Let's look at some social engineering techniques. Well, there are two major categories. There's technical and human. Let's go through the technical ones first. So there's email. Phishing attacks are a classic example of a social engineering technical attack. But as I said in the previous slide, you have to think creatively. This is also part of the art. You need to be able to convince people through your email to click on a link that they shouldn't be clicking, or releasing funds, or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. There's also spam. Most spam attacks are major phishing attacks. There's also chat. Online chat is a very effective way to get social engineering done, because it isn't really authenticated. Email is a little bit more authentic in that you need a username and password to send email. But with an online chat, you can get people talking very informally about stuff that they shouldn't actually be talking about, whereas email is seen as a little bit more formal. Then there's pop-ups. most websites in the olden days, if you recall, would have had all these pop-ups that want you to click with clickbait links, where you click on a link and it'll take you to a hacked website or a vulnerable website, which would then install malware on your machine. There's also phishing, which can be done via email, but phishing in general is just trying to get people to click on a link that they shouldn't be clicking on. And then social media, that's a very, very effective way in this day and age. If you befriend someone on Facebook or follow someone on Twitter, you get some form of authenticity to that account, and people start trusting you with information they shouldn't really be trusting you with. And then finally, mobile apps. There are many, many mobile apps in some of the app stores that have malware installed on them, and you need to socially engineer people to believe that installing this app will make their phone run faster, extend battery life, etc. But in the background, it's actually got a Trojan. Okay, let's look at the human aspects. Well, you need to be legitimate. So what I mean there, you need to come across as someone who is legitimate and authentic, which is part of the importance. So if you are trying to, for example, get the username and password of a CEO of a very large organization, if you can convince the IT support staff that you are in fact this person and that you really need your password changed, they will change it for you, even though it might bypass any process controls they should have in place for changing passwords. You need to be in a position of trust. So, for example, in a larger organization, you could entrench yourself as an IT support person and go to your target's desk and help them out with some sort of desktop support issue, as an example, and gain their trust, and then eventually their username and passwords. Eavesdropping, just standing around listening to people, is a very good way of getting information, especially if you plant a seed in the conversation and then see where that takes you. And then shoulder surfing, literally just standing behind somebody while they type their username and password, is also a very effective technique if you can catch their password as they're typing it on their keyboard. And then finally, tailgating. That's for physical access. Following somebody into an access controlled environment when they tag through some form of access control turnstile, that's an effective way of getting through into an access controlled environment. So why is social engineering so effective? Well, if you think of all the modules and all the different attacks out there, social engineering is a very, very, very effective technique of actually getting usernames and passwords, getting credentials, or getting what you need. Why? Well, firstly, because it's human. You're hacking the human, and the human is the weakest link in the security chain. Well, that is a known fact, and it is because human nature. Everybody just wants to help everybody else. Believe it or not, that is human nature. I know it doesn't seem like that from time to time, but generally, if somebody asks for help, the person who's been asked will give help because it's in their nature to do so. So you're literally just preying on the good side of human nature, which isn't really a nice thing to do, but it's what the bad guys do. So we as ethical hackers have to do it to show the organization where their weaknesses lie. It also comes up as a result of ignorance and lack of training. So if you don't train the users in an organization to be security aware, not to give out information freely, even to people who seem legitimate, you will be prone, or you will be vulnerable to social engineering attacks. It's also easily accessible. You don't really need much to launch a social engineering attack. You could literally just walk up to someone in a coffee shop and have a conversation. So there isn't really a lot of barriers to entry to get into social engineering. And finally, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to detect. If someone is having a conversation on the street with a hacker or somebody who's trying to gain access to your organization, there's no technology in the world that would be able to detect that, unless you have surveillance on every single person who works for you. So it's no intrusion detection system, no intrusion prevention system, no firewall, or any of the other security devices would be able to detect a social engineering attack. Okay, let's see what countermeasures are in place. So what countermeasures are there for this very effective technique? Well, password policies. If you are going to be social engineered, if you change your password policies often, at the very least, it limits the amount of time somebody has access to your systems. So setting password policies where people change their passwords frequently is a form of countermeasure for this sort of attack. You could also have account lockouts. So in other words, if somebody types in the username and password more than 3 times incorrectly, it locks the account out. This could also lead to a denial of service, and it has been used as denial of service in the past, where somebody would go to an organization's webmail page, as an example, out on the internet, and knowing someone's username would automatically lock them out of their account, so that this person couldn't actually access their account until they called into IT support to change it. So use account lockouts very sparingly. User awareness training is probably your most powerful tool. Making people aware of what is out there and what the risks are actually raises the awareness to ensure that people are a little bit more security savvy when it comes to social engineering. You could classify and secure information, which is something you should be doing. So as an example, don't let all employees have access to all the confidential information. People should actually be classified and only have access to the information that they really need. In that way, if a hacker hacks or social engineers a normal user, he might not have access to the confidential information he's requiring. He'll still have access to the network, as an example, until you change your passwords, but he wouldn't be able to get access to the classified information very, very easily. Then we escort visitors. This is for physical security. If somebody comes into your building, make sure they're escorted all the time and not just left to wander around to do some eavesdropping or shoulder surfing or plug into a network, who knows what. Password reset best practices. So by what we mean here is we reset passwords and make sure that we follow the complexity and make sure that the passwords aren't the same as they were before, and etc. etc. Then background checks, that's for people that you employ or for people or for contractors coming into a building. Doing a background check if you're a highly secure environment to make sure that these people are who they say they are is a form of making sure that you're not being socially engineered. Two-factor authentication, if you have a password but you also have some sort of device with a code that you need to access before you access the system, is a very effective way of preventing any form of password attack. And then finally, anti-malware. So there is some technology out there as a countermeasure for social engineering, and that would be making sure your anti-malware is up to date, so that if a phishing email comes in, it is detected in some form, or if it's got a malicious payload or an executable on there, that it is blocked so that the user is protected from this social engineering attack. And that pretty much covers and ends this video on social engineering. Thank you for watching.